Welcome back to the Strangford Management Podcast. Today I'm with Anji McGrandles. She is a wellness coaching expert. She's also the founder of the Mind Tribe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So it's quite timely. I think a lot of people that will watch this podcast will have seen the recent ARMA wellness report that's come out, and it's had some quite shocking statistics and findings. I think sort of running through a few that I noticed, about 65% of respondents felt that their mental health was at risk working block management. Roughly 30% of people believed that they were at risk of physical damage. Noticed an increase in work-related stress in the last year, and there's been an increase in people saying that they are likely to not be in the industry in the next 3 years. So a big issue with stress around the workplace at the moment, which is perfect timing for why we've brought Anji in. So tell us about the Mind Tribe.
So we are a workplace wellness business, and we work with companies on their wellbeing strategy. And that can be anything from developing a program to delivering workshops. We have an online platform as well. And we work with lots of different people in the industry. So we do work across property management, and we also work with people like Barclays Bank, McDonald's, Boston Consulting Group. All of the training that we provide is grounded in neuroscience, because we truly believe that once you understand how the brain works, then you can start to manage emotions, feelings, and in turn behaviors. We use a lot of mindset techniques and strategies as well, and then lots of really practical tools that you can deploy and implement to problem-proof your day.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Well, it's going to be good to have a comparison between sort of Barclays and the block management industry. So I'm sure there's similarities, but sort of hopefully some big differences as well. And full disclaimer for everyone, Anji also works with Strangford Management. So she's been working with us on sort of our strategies and working with our staff and things like that. So yeah, we already know a little bit of an insight of each other and the company. So going back to this block management report by ARMA, I think it's obviously pretty shocking and slightly scary that people feel this particular way. Big opening question. What do you think companies can do to combat stress in the workplace or with their workforce? Is there anything, let's talk easy wins to start with. Is there anything that generally people don't do that you typically say, let's start here? Where's that?
I think kind of, first of all, you can't get away from stress.
Yeah.
Stress is everywhere. So trying to say like, let's combat stress or you can't get rid of stress. What you can do is support your workforce in terms of managing stress a little bit better. Mm-hmm. What I tend to find that the companies that have the best stress management and stress management techniques have a really good culture.
Okay.
So I think a lot of it comes down to company culture, and it comes from the top. So, if you create an environment that people feel mentally, physically, emotionally safe, then that's a big start in terms of your well-being and your staff well-being, because then people feel confident to have conversations. If not everybody has got an open door policy, but if you have an open dialogue about mental health, then when people do have challenges or they're struggling at work, it's a lot easier to tackle them, because people feel a lot more empowered to come and talk about them. So I think a lot of it comes down to culture. That's
a huge point, actually. I just want to sort of re-emphasize that. I think it's so often overlooked, sort of actually creating and fostering a particular culture in a company. I think so many companies maybe just say, hey, our culture is our culture because we've hired people and it's just naturally made this way. Whereas I'm certainly of the opinion that you can create a certain culture and you can make a culture 100%. That you're going for. And if you're saying actually the culture is a way of managing stress in the workforce, then actually a lot of companies are just looking at the wrong thing. They're looking maybe, okay, how do we reduce stressors in the workforce? Well, actually, you haven't even looked at the right thing first. You haven't asked the right question. And it goes back to what is your culture? It could be a completely toxic culture. Exactly. So if you're just looking at stressors, you're never going to get anywhere in the first place. So I really want to emphasize that point that's huge. So if you are an owner of a company and you haven't looked at culture, probably start now. It affects everything else.
It does, because, a lot of companies, they're talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk.
Right.
And that's super important. You create this culture where people feel safe. If you're working in a blame culture, then that's not going to empower your employees. That's not going to make your employees feel confident. It's not going to enhance their mental wellness. I think you've got to make well-being part of your DNA.
Sure.
It's got to be a red thread that runs throughout your company. So it's got to be part of your culture. It's got to be an extension of your culture. It's got to be aligned to the company values. Otherwise, it just rubs and it doesn't feel right. So if you deploy things like, I don't know, baskets of fruit on a Friday, gym memberships, they're great, but if they're not part of the culture, they just don't feel right.
Sure.
And well-being is more than that as well.
Yeah.
And I think the problem or the challenge that some companies face, especially from the top down, is they don't actually ask people what they need.
Yeah.
So it's like, we'll bring this in and we'll assume that this will work. We will give people, fruit on a Friday and a gym membership and an EAP, and that will kind of tick that well-being box.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the companies that have good wellness, good staff retention, where, people are happy, they're the companies that it's not a tick box exercise.
Sure.
That they've got the team involved and what they're doing reflects their business and reflects the people within their business. So, for example, I was working with a company not that long ago, and we were working on their strategy and working on their initiatives for the year. And, they were really keen to talk to people in the business that were neurodiverse.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was some of the ideas that we brainstormed, some of the program elements that weren't going to work for that audience. So we took a step back and we were like, who's in your business? What do they want? What can we create for them? What initiatives? And that's just an example. But it's about knowing who's in your business and knowing what they want.
Definitely. I think that's a good bit of advice that I received, trying to sort of grow a culture. I think I was sort of saying, these are key buzzwords that are good and this is what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. And I think I remember a mentor of mine simply just said, why don't you just ask people? Just every quarter send out a little survey and just ask them what they feel like. And since we've been doing that, the benefit structure that we've got at Strangford, I'd honestly say 3/4 of it, maybe more, has been ideas that have come from actual staff members.
Yeah.
And then they've just said, I would like this. And then I've gone away and sort of said, okay, well, how could we do that for, the wider body of staff? So it's definitely been a game changer for us. It's really made a difference, and bringing people into the changes in a company is it's also empowering for them. So they kind of feel a bit of ownership over what you're doing and things. So I think that's definitely a super powerful point to make. And like I said, if there are any business owners reading this, watching it, and haven't considered this, start now. Right now, it's what is it, June at the moment? Look at end of June, second quarter, start saying, well, just a basic survey. I think our surveys, 6-7 questions. They're not going to take too long, but the stuff, the feedback that you get back, the detail that you get back is gold, frankly.
100%. And it's a good way to temperature check as well, and just gauge how people are feeling in the business. And I think the thing with wellness as well, you've got to be prepared to course correct. Sure. And by that, I mean, you could start off on a wellness journey with a program that's heading one way, and actually it might not be as well received as you thought it might be. And I think you've got to be brave and be able to say, well, actually, we're going to go back to the drawing board and we're going to change that. We're not going to do online because online's not working. We're going to go back to in person, or we need to focus more on X and less on Y. So I guess there's no one size fits all. Yeah. Every business is different. But to kind of summarize what we've just been discussing, I think you should ensure that your well-being, comes from the top. It feels like it's part of your DNA. It's your red thread, and it's aligned to your culture, aligned to your values, and answers the team needs. And you'll only know what the team needs are if you ask.
Definitely. I think I'm gonna ask you an unfair question, considering you just said no sort of one size fits all, but as a general sort of industry or as a society, why do you believe, and this might be a really long question, but why do you believe that sort of professional stress is on the rise? Is there anything, I know we've had COVID, I know we've had a lot of changes in society in general. Is there anything you're thinking, actually, these are some real obvious causes for why we sort of started to see stressors increasing?
I think there's a couple of things. So definitely COVID has played a huge part. I mean, having to constantly, if you think about the COVID period, right, you've got us having to constantly adapt to change, and that puts you on high alert. The brain doesn't like change. Change creates fear within us. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to fear, our brain draws on experience. A bit like if you think about when you're a kid, the first time you step out in front of a car, you get a huge rush of cortisol, you get a bit of a fright, you might go a bit hot and sweaty, you step back and you move on. But the next time you go to cross a road, you know to look both ways and to make sure that, you know, there's no cars coming. And that's negative reinforcement. It's telling the brain, the brain's telling us the next time we go to cross a road, we've got to check because we've had this experience. Now, the thing with COVID is we had nothing to draw on, no experience to draw on. You know, we were never locked in our houses before. We were never, you know, queuing for food and running out of toilet rolls. These are like really unknowns for everybody.
Sure.
So it puts the brain under an enormous amount of stress. Like I said, the brain likes routine. Mm-hmm. The brain doesn't like to not know what's coming up. And when the brain doesn't know what's coming up and it doesn't know how to respond, then it just fills in the gaps.
Okay.
And predicts and almost storytells. And that's when we can get into a really kind of negative, unhealthy, emotional place. So COVID was doing that constantly pushing that button. And I don't think we can underestimate what kind of impact that's had. You know, there was people that were never suffering with anxiety that all of a sudden had anxiety. Then there was people who, you know, had anxiety and had never felt it so crippling and so debilitating as they did during that period. So it did have a big impact. I don't think we're quite out of the COVID wave, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I think people are still getting their head around hybrid working, still adapting to it. It's working for some people. It's not for others.
I agree.
I'm going into businesses all the time where I'm hearing mixed messages where people say, I love hybrid working. It really works for me. I get to do this. I get to do that. Then other people feel quite anxious about it. So I still think we're coming out of that. We're obviously in the middle of a global economic crisis as well, which again makes people feel stressed, takes a toll on your mental health, adds a completely different dimension to your working day as well.
Sure.
Because it impacts, you know, everything.
You're taking that with you into the office. Yeah, you're taking it with you. So I think there are external factors that have definitely seen a rise in poor mental health. But also, I think we're better at talking about mental health than we were maybe 5 years ago. Yeah.
There are so many campaigns. There are so many initiatives now that encourage people to talk more openly about mental health, wellness programs in the workplace that a lot of businesses have put in place. Again, that makes it easier for people to say, actually, I'm not having a day off sick today. I'm having a mental health day.
Sure.
So then when HR are recording it, it's been recorded differently to maybe what it would have been 5-10 years ago, where people wouldn't have wanted to have said they're having a mental health day in fear that it was going to impact on how they were viewed or their performance within the business, and how they progressed. So I think there's two factors. And also I think hybrid working has played a big role in burnout. So there's been a huge increase in burnout over the last couple of years.
Right.
A real rise. And I think hybrid working has played a big part in that as well.
Why do you think? Just because the expectations? I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. I think, I was having this chat only a week ago saying how there's too many sort of sweeper statements in, LinkedIn or what have you, or whatever medium that says hybrid working is here to stay. It's perfect. Every company should jump on the bandwagon. And then there's other people saying it doesn't work for anyone. Everyone's got to get back into the office, the end. And it's almost a case of, from what I've seen, I can see it working wonderfully for certain people. I can see it working terribly for other people.
Yeah.
But because there's such a narrative of it either works 100% or it doesn't work and it's 0%, people tend to fall into two camps. And then you find it difficult of saying to someone, I'm not sure this is working for you. And then they find, actually, I'm not sure working. And I don't want to generalize again, but certainly the experience I've had, it tends to be more of the younger person tends to find hybrid working a little bit more challenging because there's not the support network when they're at home or wherever they're working out of. So trying to sort of combat that and then have those discussions to say, actually, it might be better if you're back in 5 days a week. It's very difficult when maybe someone of a similar age or the same age in the same role might just be able to deal with it better, and they're happy to work, I don't know, 3 days from the office versus you are working 5 days from the office. So it's a really awkward conversation to sort of have. And I think I feel like we're not there yet, but I feel like we're going to that point, but I just feel like it's not an acceptable conversation to have because of the other narratives that are being pushed. And the other point you made about actually we're just a lot more open about talking about it now is really interesting. So I think that's really true as well. And I think it might have just been a case that's always been there, but we just didn't talk about it openly, or it's not being kind of reported as such before. So, these statistics of 75% noticed an increase in work-related stress, well, it might have always been there. You just didn't label it as that.
Exactly.
So, I think that's something to really say. Shocking statistic, but maybe not that shocking. It just, I can't remember how long these wellness, surveys have been done. I think it's only a couple of years. So 5-10 years ago, it could have been exactly the same number, but actually we just didn't know about it.
And labeling it as well. So World Health Organization has only just in the last couple of years defined burnout as a thing. So that was never a thing previously, but I'm sure there was loads of people burnt out 10 years ago, 7 years ago, but it was just not recognized. So I think there's been a lot of changes.
Sure.
COVID has definitely highlighted well-being in some positive ways as well. I think COVID definitely helped some people with their wellness. I know lots of people that were more relaxed, felt like they'd had a reset, got fitter, ate better, stopped drinking, so there was positive effects that COVID had on people's wellness as well, but there was definitely negative effects. I think what it did was it brought well-being, wellness, and especially workplace wellness to the forefront of the news.
Definitely. It's not to go off a tangent, but I've seen a huge increase in, I don't say famous people, it's such a generic term, but celebrities, artists, musicians, all sorts, being more vocal about their mental health and saying, 100%. Actually, I need to stop. Because before I would have just pushed through this and it would have been fine and I would have crumbled, and no one sees like post-tour that I needed 6 months off to try and have therapy and things, or whoever that might have been. Whereas now it's a case of actually I need to cancel a few nights singing because this is not okay where I'm at, and I can't continue to do what I do every night and just crumble. So, I think that's a really good point to make. And just stemming off from that as well is, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on how you see someone's character change when you feel that they are highly stressed or possibly going through burnout. So, I know from personal experience, people have said to me in the past at certain points, hey, you're not yourself. You're not acting like X, Y, and Z. I think you're too stressed. And I'm sat there thinking, I'm fine. This is normal for me. And I'm probably part of the problem of 5-10 years ago, I didn't label anything as stress or mental health well-being. Whereas now it's almost makes me stop and think, hang on a sec, am I being right to myself? So, what do you see in terms of sort of characteristics? Because I think a lot of people maybe listening or watching might say, I'm fine, I'm not stressed, but actually are just not identifying it.
From a workplace perspective, if we keep in that workplace lens on things, and I guess outside of work as well, I think the first thing you notice is people's confidence.
Okay.
Their confidence tends to go quite quickly. You feel like you're not coping, whether that's a perception that you're not coping or whether that's fact. And, perception is a big player in stress. The two main causes of stress are lack of control, so not feeling like you're in control of things, and your perception of a situation. So confidence definitely is one of the first things that you see people changing people.
So even not making decisions effectively and quickly that they may have usually done, they're just not confident in sort of putting their foot forward and saying this is the right decision to make. They're just sort of stagnating on things and letting things sort of build up and such.
Definitely. So if you work in, say, the client services industry and you have a negative experience with a client, then your next experience, if that's dented your confidence or that client has made you feel stressed, then your next experience with that client will be based on that. A bit like what I was saying earlier, the brain draws on experience, and that's what the brain will be drawing on, what happened before that previous encounter. So that puts you on high alert, and that makes you feel stressed and it makes you feel anxious. So you don't necessarily go into things confidently. You can sometimes, rush through things when you're stressed because you're juggling lots of different things. So you might drop a ball. Like
distracted, I guess, as well, throws into there. You're just rushing around and you're not focusing on one thing or one task, and you're just distracted by lots of different things and trying to pay a small amount of attention to lots of things instead of just saying, let me just focus on this one and get it done.
It's a funny one, stress, because everybody lumps everything into a stress bowl, I think.
Sure.
So it's like, I feel really stressed. I feel really stressed. And there's a fine line between pressure and stress. And there's a very fine line between stress and burnout. Burnout is stealth. It can creep up on you so quickly. And the same with pressure. A bit of pressure can flip quite quickly into stress. And I think the key is to knowing what level of pressure you best operate under.
Okay.
So getting an understanding of, because look, we need a bit of pressure in our lives. I don't know about you, but sometimes, I think if I've got a project that I've got 4 weeks to do, I'll probably do my best part of that project closer to the deadline than I will 4 weeks before.
It's human nature.
Because it's human nature,
Whatever deadline, if you've got, give yourself 6 months or 6 weeks, it'll take the amount of time that you've given yourself to do it.
Yeah, so we do need a bit of pressure in our lives. Some of the symptoms of burnout are really similar to those that you experience during stress. And the difference is stress can be characterized by doing too much. That can be having like too many demands, too many changes, too many decisions to make. Burnout is the opposite. Burnout is not doing enough. Burnout's a feeling of lethargy, not having enough energy, time, enthusiasm. So kind of stress gets you going. Burnout kind of dulls everything. So you've got to kind of recognize when you're feeling stressed and when you're kind of borderline burnout.
Do you think there's a link between procrastination and burnout, therefore? Or do you think that's too much of a stretch? I've talked to a few people that have sort of said, sometimes I find things really hard and I just procrastinate and I find myself very distracted, and I'm sort of thinking, well, I don't know if that's lacking a purpose in what you're doing, or you don't understand what you're supposed to be doing or how you're supposed to be doing it, or possibly you're just in a state of burnout and you don't know about it. If it is so stealthy, then it could just be that, I guess, as well.
I think there are people who are like naturally procrastinators and go through that process. But procrastination is a sign of of burnout. It is. And I think when you're overwhelmed, you're just like, I can't even think about what I want for dinner.
Sure.
If you've got a lot on and you're juggling lots of different things and your mind's all over, just making that simple decision is, what do I have for dinner tonight? It's like, can somebody just take that out of my hands? Because I can't even think about that. So there is a link between them for sure. There are 6 signs of burnout, and one of them is procrastination.
It is, okay. Yeah. It's interesting you saying this, because even now I'm thinking of periods in the past where I've been guilty of procrastination. I've had that conversation with my wife and been like, I don't know what we're doing for dinner. I can't think of anything. Nothing's coming to my head. I've really struggled with lethargy and the motivation to do things. And then I'm thinking, well, actually, I need to be disciplined. So I kind of replace motivation with discipline, and I just force myself to do something.
Yeah.
And now I'm sitting there thinking, well, hang on, was I just burnt out that whole time? Because I was just labeling it as I just needed to realign my purpose for what I was doing.
Well, do you know what? There's a bit of both, but When we're stressed, we obviously our body gets flooded with cortisol, our brain gets flooded with cortisol. And there's a part of our brain called our prefrontal cortex, our PFC. And our prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision-making, planning, thought processing. And the minute we get flooded with cortisol, that part of the brain switches off. It literally goes offline. So that's why when we're really stressed, when we're constantly activating those cortisol levels and, dialing up stress, that's why we don't always make our best decisions. That's why we can't plan. That's why we don't always think rationally. It is interesting because it does kind of give you an insight into why we behave in certain ways when we're stressed. Yeah. I know when I've been under stress before, or I've felt really overwhelmed, which again can feel stressful. Some of the simplest things that really do involve that part of my brain, I've struggled to do, like deciding what to have for dinner.
Sure.
Like planning what you're doing over the weekend. I can't think about it right now because I just need to get through today. And that's what we do when we're stressed. We tend to just see exactly what's in front of us. We can't see what's happening around us.
Yeah.
So that probably kind of explains a little bit.
That phase to an
extent. A little bit of that as well, yeah.
Well, I guess, how do you come back from burnout or high stress levels? Like, is there a technique involved? Is there a strategy? Is there something that people can do? I certainly know how I try and work through it and combat it, but is there something that's, I don't say universally accepted, but is there something that's generally, you can do this and over time it will kind of lead you back to where you should be?
Everybody's different.
Sure.
I guess a couple of things. I'm a big believer in proactively managing your mental health.
Okay.
So I think that if you're a good, what I call self-manager, and you're looking after your well-being, it can really put you in good stead going through challenging periods. There's lots of things you can do. There's lots of mindset techniques. There's lots of really practical tools as well. But one of the key things I always say to people is to look after your shed.
Okay.
So your shed is sleep, hydration, exercise, diet.
Okay.
And
I thought you were going to say shed, that's your mind or something.
No, it's not the wooden shack at the bottom of the garden.
So what was it again? It was shed is
sleep, hydration, exercise, and diet.
Right.
And I think something really interesting you said earlier was about habits and being disciplined. And I think if you can make tiny habits, I'm talking about like that 1%, that once you make small changes and you practice it on a daily basis, when you go into really busy periods, you're on the front foot rather than on the back foot. And that helps you recover quickly from setbacks. It helps you manage your stress levels better. So, you might be thinking, well, sleep, hydration, exercise, diet. Yeah, well, everybody knows that, they do. But, just being 2% dehydrated can have a huge impact on your cognitive ability and your decision making.
Wow.
So, you think, I didn't have much to drink today. Well, that will impair your cognitive ability. Everybody knows if you don't get enough sleep, you feel terrible and it impacts everywhere. If you don't sleep very well and you have a couple of nights on the bounce where you're not sleeping, you probably, and I'm not saying everybody does this, but you probably drink more caffeine. Mm-hmm. You probably drink food that might be high in sugar to give yourself a few energy bursts. You probably skip the gym because you're too tired. And, all of these things make a difference to how you feel.
Definitely. I think it's interesting how you put sleep first as well. So it's something that I've been digging into a lot recently. And I was a terrible sleeper. I was the sort of 4.5, 5 hours maybe a night for extended periods. And it was actually a discussion that I had 3 months ago. And the gentleman sat down and explained the effects of lack of sleep and from a medical point of view.
Yeah.
And it scared everything out of me. And I sort of went home and I was like, okay, well, actually, it doesn't necessarily matter that I'm focusing so much on diet. It doesn't really matter that I'm focusing on exercise right now. If I don't get sleep sorted, the rest of it's not going to matter. And I really, really started to sort of delve into it and think, okay, what do I need to do? Like, at what time do I need to go to bed? How am I having an evening process? When am I switching off my phone? And when am I stopping watching TV or on my laptop or something? And really trying to kind of build this entire habit of how I manage sleep. And I'm still, I'm still struggling with it. I'd still go back and forth, and some nights I'll have 7.5, 8 hours, perfect. Some nights I'm still on 4.5, 5.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is so enormous. And I've had discussions with senior people at Strangford, my wife, and I've said, when I've had enough sleep, I make better decisions when it comes to mainly around diet and exercise.
Yeah, 100%. They're all of those things. Sleep, hydration,
Mm-hmm.
exercise, diet, they're all interlinked.
Yeah.
And they are the foundations of good well-being. And sleep is a big one. I think everybody has their own non-negotiables when it comes to looking after their shed, right? There are some things that you can let drop and it's not going to have a massive impact, or you can dial down a little bit. But I think for a lot of people, sleep is the number one. For me, I think it's definitely exercise and diet.
Yeah.
I'm not too bad on sleep, although I've had really poor sleep periods and it's not great. I remember I lost my dad a couple of years ago, and I went through it felt like forever, but it was probably about a 4-month period where I just couldn't sleep. And I'm a coach, right? I'm a wellbeing coach.
Sure.
And I knew exactly what was happening, and I knew exactly kind of what I needed to do. But I was so kind of caught up in grief that I had to just park it. And in the end, kind of, I was like, right, I've got to have a reset here. And just kind of, you were saying, how do you get back from, burnout? How do you get back from periods of stress? It does sometimes need an intervention. You sometimes need to have a complete reset. You need to have a break, and you need to give your mind time to rest.
What does that look like? Does that sort of suggest, and not sort of pointing the finger at you of self-promotion here, but does it mean working with someone like yourself as a coach, or could it mean a 2-week holiday somewhere? Could it just mean, I don't know, something that's really nominal? Like, I'm just wondering kind of the extent of I suppose it depends on the case by case basis, right?
Definitely.
So
yeah.
It could be something as simple as, hey, look, just take a 2-week break. Don't look at anything to do with work, and that can reset you otherwise. But if I suppose in bad severe cases, it could be actually you do need to work with a coach because you're so far gone that you need to sort of be pulled back to an extent. So it's difficult sometimes, because I think there still is, I think it's changing, but I still think there is this glorification of the sort of hustle culture. And I mean, I think it's all just crap, frankly. Yeah. And from someone who bought into it wholeheartedly, hook, line and sinker, I was like, hustle, hustle, hustle. And then I thought, hang on a sec, I'm not sleeping. I'm making bad diet decisions. I'm getting injured when I'm training. I find myself not even drinking water during the day, and all these bad decisions coming from it. I think, just realizing where you are kind of on that spectrum of, actually, this is just a bit of pressure, and pressure's fine. It changes me and develops me and builds character. Stress is not great, but it can be managed. Burnout is the end of the line, and you need to have an intervention here. So I think it's important for people to understand where they mainly are on the spectrum. I mean, do you think it's easy for people to find, like, to label themselves, oh, I'm here, or do you think maybe sometimes that's someone like yourself that will come in and say, I can kind of see how you're working and see how you're acting, and speaking to you, I sort of think that you're more here, whereas you might think you're sort of down, pressure, stress. Actually, you're like stress burnout.
It's such a tricky one, Michael, because I've worked with people who are completely in denial of being burnt out and have said, I'm fine. But they're not fine. They're 100% not fine. I think you've got to, like I said, you've got to recognize where you're at and where you best work under pressure and when you don't. And if you feel like you're on the edge, and if you feel like, things really feel out of control, then you've got to go and ask for help.
Sure. Sometimes
you need somebody to point it out to you, but sometimes you can just go and sit down with your HR or your line manager and just say, this is how I'm feeling. And once you start to put it down and you start to talk to somebody, then they're like, well, actually, let's make a couple of changes here and a couple of changes there. And then you can then start to make adjustments and get back on track. But when you keep those things to yourself and you bottle it all up and you just carry on like everything's normal, that's when you put yourself at risk of a breakdown.
Sure.
And I don't say that lightly.
Yeah.
But I've seen people who just won't take any help, and they get to that point, and that's that breaking point. So sometimes, you might need is a 2-week holiday to reset and make a plan. But I think it's the making the plan bit that's really important, because it's okay going off and having a long weekend and, you've gotten over that project or over that challenging period and you've had that 2-week holiday and you feel great and you go back to work. But it's what you do when you go back to work that makes the difference.
Sure.
How do you stop yourself from getting back in that sticky place again? What are the changes that you're going to make? And it goes back to what I said about being a good self-manager and making small changes that, once practiced habitually, that become part of your daily routine, your habits, then they put you on the front foot. So you feel better. If you're eating really well, so gut health, mental health, intrinsically linked, 90% of your serotonin is created in the lining of your gut, your enteric nervous system, or your ENC. And that's travels up to your central nervous system. Everybody knows serotonin is a really good feel-good hormone, makes you feel good. Really important to have lots of it. If you've got poor gut health, then that 90% serotonin isn't being created in your stomach, and it isn't then going up to your CNS. So, small changes like eating well, taking a really decent pre and probiotic, there's shortcuts. And you don't have to, be on salads and couscous and vegetables 24/7. Life's about living as well.
Sure.
But if you can look after yourself, kind of aim for that 80-20 balance. So know that Monday to Friday, you're, eating a nutritious breakfast, decent lunch, and you're hydrating and you're getting some sleep. Then on a weekend, go and eat the cake and drink the beer and have the glass of wine. Life's for living.
Sure.
But going through periods when you need to take care of yourself, once you do things and they become a habit, then you go into those periods better armed to deal with things. If your sleep's in a good position, in a good place, then you're not going to feel mentally exhausted during challenging periods at work. If you're hydrated, you're not going to drink, it's not going to impair your cognitive abilities. If you're drinking lots of caffeine, then how's that going to make you feel? If you're not eating food or you're skipping meals, that is all going to impact how you deal with things, the decisions you make. There was a study a few years ago, you may have heard of it, and it was across judges in the US. And they looked at when judges made decisions where people got off on charges.
Sure.
And the slot right before lunch, less people got off with a sentencing. And they reckon that was because the judge was really hungry and really thirsty at that point. So the decisions that they made influenced how they felt. And I can't remember who carried out that study, but if you look at that, that's fact. And the people who were in straight after lunch were more likely to get let off than the people who were in before lunch. So that's
incredible.
If you're ever in trouble, people, make sure you don't get the pre-lunch slot in court.
Just pre-book,
because it won't help you.
Pre-book in advance. The early afternoon
the
slot.
2:00 slot.
I mean, that is, we sort of hold judges in very high esteem, and yet they're still affected by the same thing. So, whether you're sort of lower down sort of the workforce chain, or you're a judge in this country or in the US, it's incredible to think we're all affected by the same things. One thing I'd love to know, and there's a lot of noise out there, whether it's on social media and self-gurus and all these sorts of things, self-proclaimed gurus. Where would you advise someone, just average Joe person, where would you advise they go to get some more information, apart from yourself reaching out to you? But where could they start to say, actually, I just want to start the basics on managing, my own stressors a bit more? Where would you start? Where would you advise that person to go?
If you're struggling with your stress levels, I think it's good to talk to somebody like a trusted friend.
Sure.
And that's always a good start if you don't want to talk to somebody on a professional level. Because I always think about, when I'm being hard on myself, or if I'm thinking about decisions that I want to make, I always think, well, what would I tell my best friend? What advice would I give my best friend? And I always give myself that advice, because it's always a lot kinder than if it's the voice in my head. So I think speaking to someone that you're close to, that you feel, confident enough has got your back, is good because you'll get a different perspective, and it'll be a perspective that you'll trust as well. And again, it might be that that person might say to you, well, actually, I've noticed that you're really stressed at the moment, and I think maybe you need to go and speak to somebody, or you might want to go and talk to your GP, or you might need to go and speak to somebody at work. So I think, there are different avenues you can go down. If you don't want to go and talk to somebody, if you don't want to talk to somebody at work, there are loads of great books out there that can help with stress levels. I was just talking about The Shed earlier. There's a book called The Shed Method by a author called Sarah Milne, and that's really good. And that's about how, you can manage stress through managing your shed. There's another book as well called The Source by a lady called Dr. Tara Swart. And again, that's great because it dives into the neuroscience a little bit, but she does it in such a smart way. Like, she talks about kind of neuroscience on layman's terms. Good. And it's a bit like, well, look, this is what our body does when we're under pressure. This is why we're doing it. Something I always say to my clients as well is keep a stress diary. Yeah. Just keep a stress diary for 2 weeks. And if anybody from, any listeners from your podcast want to see what a stress diary looks like, then, reach out to me directly, because I've got some that I can share. And I think if you keep a stress diary for 2 weeks and analyze it, you can then pinpoint what the underlying stresses are. And patterns and things like that. And then you can start to know what your triggers are and identify maybe some underlying problems. And then you can start to make changes. So something as simple as a stress diary can really help. Yeah, definitely. I think something that struck me then as well was you could simply audit yourself to start with, even just using, the shed. I think we're all going to be pretty self-aware of, hey, do we sleep enough? Am I just exercising poorly or not at all? Yeah. Am I eating just terrible food? There's a lot of immediate audits that you can kind of look at and say, hang on a sec, did I drink any water today? Well, why don't I just go and buy, a litre bottle, double lined, fill it up at the start of the day and make sure I've drunk whatever, 1 or 2 of those a day. Easy kind of wins that you can kind of say, well, it's maybe not going to cure wherever you are. Yeah. But it's a really good start. Definitely. It's like looking at where you're winning and where you're winging. Sure. So you just said there, for example, your shed. Start with your shed. Like, am I winning with my sleep and winning with my diet? But am I not doing so great with my exercise and hydration? And what can I do? And then it's about making what I call micro hacks, micro changes, little, like, small incremental changes that once you do it regularly, can make a big difference. So I always say to people, look at things like habit stacking. So say if you're winging it when it comes to hydration, for every cup of tea you have, make sure you've drank 500 ml of water. Yeah. Or when you get up first thing in the morning, before you do anything else, have a glass of water. And once you just start to do these things, they become habitual, just like brushing your teeth. Yeah. You don't have to be told to brush your teeth. Yeah. You automatically do it. And the same applies to these small changes. Again, if it's exercise, how can you habit stack exercise into your day? Can you take a phone call at work while you're doing a block walk? If you don't have to take notes, if it's just something that you have to be on and you don't have to be in front of a computer screen. Yeah. Can you take it on the go? And making yourself accountable and just trying to introduce small changes like that all add up and go towards it being a win. Definitely. So I think, small changes and doing a little bit of an audit. Where am I winning? Where am I winning? Where am I winging? Definitely. And it's incredible. I would say the biggest effects I've had are from tiny changes. Now I charge my phone at night in the kitchen. Yeah. So it's out of the bedroom. And, I'm making sure that I do at least 3 10-minute walks a day. Yeah. And it's just nothingness. It's, I know I need to call this person. They're someone that I've known for years. It doesn't matter if I'm out walking or walking the dog and talking to them, jump on and be like, oh, I know I need to call this person, so I'm just going to go for a walk while I do it. And it's just these tiny, tiny, tiny changes that, you're right, just over time just build up and make you a bit more resilient. And something I want to touch upon but not dwell on a bit is I'm very much of because I think we sort of said about a lot of stress and stress is sort of negative and pressure's good and things. Whereas
I think there's something to be said for certainly my belief in terms of making the uncomfortable comfortable. And I think to grow as a person, I like to try and find the uncomfortable and try and live in that area of uncomfortableness to make it comfortable. And then it all of a sudden just becomes a pressure as opposed to a stress. So, I think people don't panic if all of a sudden you're saying, actually, I'm really stressed. It could just be, okay, well, let's just find out the root cause of it. It might just be because you're growing and you just need to go through a little 100%. Bit of it. So, you kind of have to realize to grow into something, there has to be stressors. Burnout's a whole different thing, obviously, but, there has to be stress on you and then you'll grow and all of a sudden you'll realize the thing you're stressed about is just the norm now and you can handle it and you manage it. So it goes right back to what you were saying at the start. It's not that you're trying to get rid of stress. It's just you're trying to manage stress. And there's a big difference to it. I think one thing I'd like to just kind of wrap up on is how can companies work with you? Because you've obviously done, you've done some great stuff with us and I really appreciate what you've done for us. What can companies do if they wanted to reach out and say, actually, we could do better as a company? Mm-hmm. What can you do, or what's your methodology, or what's your sort of techniques that you work with brand new clients? How do you kind of go through that with them?
Well, it's a different process for every client, because if you think, say, for example, clients like Boston Consultancy Group, they've got 10 of me in a team. So they don't need me to sit down and talk to them about strategy and aligning a program to their strategy. They want to talk to me about delivering, hard, fast training that's going to equip their team with really good tools. So it really varies. And I work with companies, as small as kind of 10, 15, right up to global companies that have thousands of staff. And I can flex up and flex down. So help people with a strategy, help them just even think about, okay, what does a wellbeing program look like? What can we do that's not going to cost me thousands and thousands of pounds, but is going to help people in my business? And then I can go away and come up with a program that they can implement themselves, that I could design or give them ideas and they can implement and run it themselves, or I can do the whole thing. So design a program, badge it, theme it, add all the training elements to it. It just really depends on what a company needs. But I tend to do a bit of a deep dive first and get to understand what the company set up, what the company culture's like, going back to what I said at the beginning, and getting a head start on what maybe some of the challenges are right now. So why have you called me into the company?
Sure.
What a couple of maybe red flags that you might be seeing. And then again, I like to speak to staff. Mm-hmm. Some companies don't always want you to, but I think it's so beneficial to do a little bit of an audit with the staff as well, whether that's kind of anonymous survey or small groups where you get a feel for what's really happening within the business. And then that informs you, and then you can go away and make recommendations. And it can be, initiatives to training, right through to counselling in some cases.
Sure.
And bringing in experts from other fields as well. So, we've got a nutritionist in the team. We've got who specialises in fitness, the menopause. There's so many different things that are encompassed in well-being, financial well-being.
Sure.
It's not just about stress. So it's about, looking at what's really important to your business right now. If some businesses going through a lot of change.
Sure.
And you can go in and talk to businesses about change, but with a wellness lens on it. So how do you manage periods of change while you're managing yourself? How do you bring your A game to work, but still look after yourself? How do you get a work-life balance? There are, so many different elements to wellness. How do you bounce back from, restructures, company restructures, things like that. So there's a lot that a wellness program can encompass in a lot of different themes and focus areas.
And it is an ongoing thing, because I think maybe I think when we first spoke, I thought it was more of I suppose it's more like therapy really, of here's a 10-week course and then at the end of the 10 weeks you'll be healed and you'll be better. Whereas actually when it comes to sort of workplace sort of management in that respect, it's more of an ongoing thing that needs to be attended to, just like many other sort of scenarios. It's something that needs to be constantly worked at and improved and tweaked and surveyed and all sorts. So just to clarify, it's not you'll have a 6-week course with Anji and then it's all done. It's more we need to actually put a strategy in, a wellbeing officer internally, and you can do the workshops, but actually it's what you then execute afterwards. That's the important stuff that makes a difference.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting as well, because obviously we've been, we talked at the top about the findings of this wellbeing survey as well. And I think sometimes, there needs to be things that happen sector-wide as well, because there are some sectors, some industries that are more prone to good well-being and poor well-being. So I think it's important as well to kind of open it out and think from a sector perspective. What can thought leaders in that place do collectively that's going to make an impact?
Yeah. Definitely. That's a whole other podcast. But we might get onto that. Thank you so much for coming in today. I think there's definitely some gold in this, and hopefully people take heed of it. And whether it's just doing a self-audit, from that very basic point, or, business leaders getting in touch with you and starting to take, their strategies for well-being in the workplace a lot more seriously. I think it's something that really needs to be done. And like we said, just looking at that survey, it's not fantastic, and something needs to certainly be done within the block management industry. Hopefully we're doing a little bit to get ourselves up and running on it, but I think a lot more people need to do it. And likewise, whatever industry that you can adapt to and start working with people. So I really appreciate you coming in. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I'll put all your details at the bottom so everyone can contact Anji if you want to, and I'll start having those discussions about improving the workforce, and we'll go from there.
Excellent.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.